What's up, everybody? It's Cirrus here on the SpicyTech channel, and I wanted to go ahead and give you guys another $15 deck tech for the $15 challenge. For those who don't know, the $15 deck challenge is basically your commander can be up to $1 and the 99 of your deck can be up to $15. The idea is that commanders should be a perfectly affordable version of Magic the Gathering for anybody to get into so that they can play with their friends. And today, the commander of choice we are going to be building is actually Vraan, the Executioner Thane. He is a 2-mana 2/2. Whenever one or more creatures you control die, each opponent loses 2 life, and you gain 2 life. And this ability only happens once per turn, but we are going to be abusing that regardless. He comes in at a whopping 41 cents. You can buy him for the price of a stick of gum. Now, here's the thing. The strategy with an Aristocrat commander is to sacrifice plenty of your own cards in order to gain incremental and sometimes even explosive advantage. So what we're going to be doing is creating lots of tokens, and then we are going to be sacrificing those. We are also going to be reanimating creatures a bunch and then sacrificing those. And even creatures that we bring onto the board are going to also kill themselves so that they can generate value. If you're a newer player to Magic the Gathering, Aristocrats is a bit of a complicated way to play the game. It feels very antithetical to trying to advance your board state in a card game, but trust me, let's go ahead and have a good time. So first of all, we want to be able to cast spells, so we are going to need to have an extensive ramp package to cast our spells, and as always, we are working on a very, very tight budget. The entire deck comes out at $15.04 when you combine the 99 with the commander's cost. So if you're wondering why certain mana rocks were chosen or certain cards were chosen, 9 times out of 10 the reason is the budget. But first we have Charcoal Diamond. Comes into play tapped, gives us black mana. It's great. Mirror Convert, we can pay life in order to get mana of any color. That's also great. Honored Heirloom is one of my favorite mana rocks in Magic the Gathering. We can get 1 mana of any color. Not amazing, but it does allow us to exile a card from somebody's graveyard if we need to, which is a wonderful threat. Just imagine it's late game and you've got you have just a mana rock on the board. The reanimation player's playing their reanimate spell. They're targeting their big game-winning card, and you just tap your mana rock and look at them and go, I exile it. You feel like a badass when you do it. I adore this card. Then we have Fractured Power Stone. The only relevant bit of text is tapping for a mana. Leaden Myrrh taps for black mana while also being a creature we can sacrifice. Prismatic Lens also taps for black mana. Wayfarer's Bauble will grab us any land from the deck. Mind Stone taps for colorless mana. It can also be cracked to draw us a card later. And Ornithopter of Paradise, like the Leaden Myrrh, also is Omni Mana that can be used as a piece of sacrifice fodder. So, with that all said, now we need to know how are we going to get to the spells we want to cast. We are ramping all kinds of stuff, and most of our stuff is very low to the ground, so the ramp package doesn't have to be massive, but we still want to be able to draw cards. So we have a fairly small draw package because, well, you'll see later, we actually have a sack and draw package that we'll be activating a little bit later. But first we have Jerome Tome. Costs 3 mana. We can pay 2 to tap it, draw a card, and discard a card. This is important because we have reanimation later in the deck, and we want to be able to throw high-costed reanimation targets that we want to cheat onto the battlefield. We want to throw them away out of our hand with Jerome Tome. Ambition's cost is just a nice flat draw 3, lose 3. Fanatical Offering lets us sack a creature to draw 2 cards and make a map token to have a little more consistency with our cards. We also have Greed, which lets us pay 2 life to draw a card. This card is massive. You have no idea how, as you're generating life gain in this deck, how fun it is to just, as you're about to start your turn, at your opponent's end phase, just pay 10 life and 5 mana into getting a nice fresh clutch of cards, and then just starting your turn with basically a full hand, no matter what you've done. It feels bonkers when you do it, but it's very, very fun. Then, of course, we have Village Rites, a classic that allows you to just sack a creature to draw 2 cards. And then Midnight Reaper and Grim Haruspex. Both of these read basically the same way. Whenever a non-token creature dies, you get to draw a card. We would love to add some more stuff into this deck that lets us function off of token destruction, like Morbid Opportunist, but if you find a way to fit that in, that is up to you. Now, how are we actually going to be winning the game? We've got all kinds of stuff we want to get to, but let me go ahead and show you the strategy we are going to be going with. Not only does our commander say whenever one or more creatures you control die, everybody loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. That's going to slowly win us the game. But we also have Falcon Wrath Noble. When a creature dies, target player loses a life and you gain a life. Agent of the Iron Throne. When a creature or artifact you control dies, each opponent loses a life. Marauding Blight Priest. Every time you gain a life, everybody loses a life. Vindictive Vampire. Whenever another creature you control dies, the vampire deals a damage to an opponent, you gain a life. Sir Conrad. Every time any creature dies, you make it to where you deal 1 damage to each opponent. This card is just, it's busted. When you look at our removal package, you'll understand why. And then we have Zulaport Cutthroat. This allows us to make everybody lose a life, and we gain a life whenever a creature we have dies. Now, bear in mind, so many of these cards give us life while also dealing damage. So with Marauding Blight Priest, that is basically adding double damage on everything we do. The Marauding Blight Priest is also adding an extra 1 damage every time our commander triggers. If we can sacrifice a creature on everybody's end step before we get to ours, if we have the commander out alone, we're dealing 8 damage to everybody every turn cycle. So in 5 turn cycles, the entire table is dead. If we're getting the commander out on turn 2, that's a turn 6 win. That's pretty quick. Marauding Blight Priest can increase this speed exponentially. But how are we going to be getting all of those creatures into the graveyard? What are we trying to throw away? Well, this is where we get to the tokens and sack outlets that we are going to be utilizing. The Persistent Specimen only costs some mana, and you can pay 3 mana to put it on the battlefield at any point. The important text on this is that you can do this at instant speed. So let's say you've got 10 mana, and you are looking at your opponent, and your turn is about to start. You can dump that 10 mana into constantly reviving and killing the Specimen over and over and over again before your turn actually starts. It doesn't say sorcery speed, and it doesn't say cast. You can just pull this right out. The Cult Construct is very much worded the exact same way, but it only costs 2 mana, and when you return it to the battlefield, it only happens if a non-skeleton died under your control. But that's easy enough for us to do. We just have to kill any of our other tokens. The Reassembling Skeleton is identical to both of these, but it is the least restrictive of all of them, only costing 2 like the Cult Conscript, but it allows you to just bring it to the battlefield tapped, no matter what you're doing. This is one of the reasons why we have the draw package before that allows us to generate value off of killing our own creatures. We are going to be bringing the skeleton back over and over and over again until somebody tries to exile it out of our grave. And if somebody's spending grave exile on the reassembling skeleton, they're probably not hitting your more important pieces you'll throw in later. Like, imagine somebody drops a Bajuka Bog on you and you're just sitting there going, oh, cool. Well, I guess I'll throw my actual reanimation targets in now. Thanks for wasting the bog. In actual token generation, we have Ghoulish Procession. This says whenever one or more non-token creatures dies, make a black zombie with Decayed. Note, this counts opponent's creatures too. Dreadhorde Invasion, at the beginning of your upkeep, you make a 1/1 token and you pay a life for it. Make sure that you kill the token whenever you make it, because it isn't a mass token, so if you hold on to it, you'll just keep on increasing the power of the token. That's not what we want in this deck. We want to make a token, kill it. Make a token, kill it. Open the Graves. Anytime a non-token creature you control dies, make a black zombie creature. And then Ogre Slumlord. It's worded like Ghoulish Procession. Whenever another non-token creature dies, make a 1/1 black rat, and rats you have Death Touch. The Ogre Slumlord is actually kind of bonkers here when you look at our removal package. Like a lot of things I've said, once we get to some of the later cards in the deck, you'll see why cards like the Ogre Slumlord is kind of busted. But before we get to the removal package, let's get into how we're going to be throwing our own creatures away. We are using a Vermin Gorger. You can tap it to sack any creature. Each opponent loses 2 life, you gain 2 life. So this is just our commander again. Lampad of Death's Vigil. Sack a creature, each opponent loses 1 life, and you gain 1 life. But noted, It is a pay 1 mana for this ability as opposed to tapping, so you can do this multiple times in a single turn. This can generate us a ton of damage on people. This card is very, very funny to watch go off. And then, of course, we have Skullport Merchant. This, when it comes into play, it makes a treasure token. That can be relevant, but the most relevant part is that you can just sack a creature or treasure and draw a card with it. Vampiric Rites, identical wording, basically, but it also gives you a life when you draw. Then you have Dockside Chef, almost identical wording. Sack a creature or an artifact, draw a card. Tarian's Journal, again, almost identical wording. Sack a creature, draw a card. Activate only as a sorcery, though. You can also discard Tarian's Journal and flip it into the Tomb of Alcatraz. This becomes a land that you can use to reanimate any of your creatures throughout the game. This is a funny card to watch go off. It also makes you discard your hand when you use it, so the Tarian's Journal can also get some of your important pieces into the grave. If you've got this on the board and like Greed, so you know you can refill your hand, just blow up your hand at the end of your opponent's turn, use Greed to draw some extra cards, and then go to Pound Town. Then we have Trading Posts. This is another way to get things out of our hand. We can also use it to create tokens. We can also use it to gain life. We can also use it to draw cards. We can also use it to get our creatures back from the graveyard. This thing does everything. It's a sack outlet that does everything. And then we have Viscera Seer and Woe Strider. Both of these can sack a creature to draw a card, with the Woe Strider having the ability to come back out of the grave if it dies. Both of these are probably our strongest sack outlets because they have no cost, they can be done at instant speed, and we can actually use this to threaten ending of games if we have enough tokens on the board with a couple of Aristocrat pieces. But I've been teasing the removal package. I've been teasing that a lot, so let's go ahead and just talk about our very first removal spell we are going to use. It is the trusty Plague Crafter. When it enters the battlefield, each player has to sacrifice a creature or a planeswalker. If they can't, they discard a card. This is massive because we're also using Butcher of Malakir. Anytime one of our creatures dies, each opponent will sacrifice a creature with us. Can you believe this card is 24 cents? This card right here, 24 pennies. This thing is really, really nuts, though. But then we have Overseer of the Dam. When it ETBs, we can blow up a creature. That's cool and all, but also whenever a non-token creature an opponent controls dies, we get to make a black zombie token. So this card doubles as token generation for us. It's really, really good when we cheat this out, but it's honestly worth the 7 mana to cast it if you have to. Feed the Swarm is one of our only ways of blowing up enchantments in mono black, but it also kills creatures. Demon's Disciple is basically another Plague Crafter. It enters the battlefield, everybody sacks a creature. Merciless Executioner, same thing, but it can't kill planeswalkers. We're not really worried about that most of the time, though. We just want ETB, everybody sacks a creature. Fleshbag Marauder, ETB, everybody sacks a creature. Locust Heavy Destroyer, ETB, everybody sacks a creature. Also has Unearth. It's noteworthy that this has Unearth. Please don't forget that this card can be just cast out of your grave when it's late game and you need it. Slum Reaper, also, guess what this card says? Everybody sacks a creature. Chain Devil, guess what this card says? Everybody sacks a creature. Everybody's sacking all kinds of creatures in this deck. We also slipped in a Murder just so we have some instant cast removal, and a Bone Shards as another way of removing a creature or a planeswalker, but this lets us discard a card to do it as well. More ways to get our high-costed cards into the graveyard. Speaking of high-costed cards, Dusk Mangler. As an additional cost to cast this, you can sack a creature, discard a card, or pay 4 life. Most of the time, we're not going to be doing that. When it enters the battlefield, though, everybody has to discard a card. Everybody has to lose 4 life. Everybody has to sack a creature. Well, you know, except you. Every deck I have that has one of these, when this card touches the battlefield, there's a collective amount of groans that happen from everyone. This card is beautiful. I adore resolving Dusk Manglers on people. And I just want you to imagine the chain of reactions when you have your Vindictive Vampires, your Marauding Blight Priest, your Zulaport Cutthroats. You've got all of these on the board on top of that Dusk Mangler. All those effects are chaining off one another. This card enters the board. Everybody's burning for like 6, 7, 10, 12. This card is doing a ton of work for you, especially if it's on, if it's sitting right next to Sir Conrad. So this makes everybody lose a creature and they lose 4 life. Sir Conrad says every time somebody loses a creature, everybody burns for 1 damage. So the Dusk Mangler and the Sir Conrad are automatically giving us 7 burn to the entire table. If we have our commander out, that's 9 burn to the entire table. It's ludicrous the amount of damage you can get out, and you're just playing your deck. You're not even, like, trying to cast burn spells. Duskmangler is still a 5/4 body that's going to sit on the board and block for you. And hell, you want this guy to block for you. You want him in the grave so you can recast him. Speaking of big creatures to cast, let's move on to the Baleful Beholder. This makes everybody sack an enchantment when it comes onto the board. Again, we are in black, so getting rid of enchantments is something that is at a premium for us. There's only like 4 cards in black that get rid of enchantments, and we're running 2 of them right now. But there's one other way we can deal with enchantments. One other little bit of spice. I mean, we are SpicyTech, so here's a little bit of spice I'm going to throw to you. One of the most popular colors to play in Commander is green, because it does damn near everything. There's a lot of commanders that are part green. A lot of the enchantments we can't deal with normally are green. So what if I told you that in black there's a counter spell that costs damn near 10 cents, and it can counter any green spell, and it can do it over and over and over and over again, and you don't have to actually think about casting it. You just throw it on the board, and it's a threat. You're holding up mana anyway to use sack outlets at instant speed, so you're not really going to be in any trouble. You're just going to be looking at your opponents going, hey, I can use this to counter the cards that blow up my shit. I can use this to counter your commanders. I can use this to counter your big draw spells. You want to cast Rishkar's Expertise? No, I have 2 black mana. I get to say no to that. I get to say no to that all the time. Death Grip is a silly little card, and if you're in mono black, I highly recommend running it, because some of your problematic cards you have trouble getting rid of are actually in the color that this takes care of. It's kind of nutty. But now you have to ask yourself, what happens when our opponents get rid of our creatures? They get rid of our Duskmanglers, our Baleful Beholders. They get rid of the Butcher of Malakir we made, our Overseer of the Damned. How are we going to get back important pieces of our strategy, like our Zulaport Cutthroat? Well, we have a very comprehensive, like actually kind of massive reanimation package in this deck. 13 cards deep. First, we have the Soul Coil Viper. We can pay 1 and sacrifice this to return any creature from the graveyard to the battlefield with a finality counter, which means it'll be exiled after it dies. Remember, with our commander, if we sacrifice a creature, we are automatically getting burned, so we're getting value from this no matter what. We have Ashnod's Intervention. If a creature on our battlefield would die, we can use this to pump it back to our hand. Now, the reason this is in the deck, a lot of people don't like this card, but I'm going to go ahead and come to bat for it because this gives us exile protection. If somebody tries to cast Swords to Plowshare, for instance, on our Butcher of Malakir, this is actually an option we have to defend it in black. You have exile protection in black. Use it if you have it. Then we have No One Left Behind. This is one of your generic 5-mana reanimation spells, but the important thing to note about this one is if you target a creature with mana value 3 or less, so like any of our Aristocrats, this actually costs only 2 mana to cast. I don't see this card ran a lot, probably because we've got all kinds of other strong options like Dance of the Dead, Animate Dead, Reanimate itself. However, I highly recommend trying this card out. It is a nice budget alternative to those, especially if we're trying to get creatures that cost under 3 mana anyway, which a lot of the ones in this deck are. Then we have Inscription of Ruin. This has a kicker cost. This allows us to choose 1, but if the spell is kicked, we can choose any number instead. Target opponent discards 2 cards. Not super relevant for our strategy. The main thing is that it can return a creature with mana value 2 or less from the graveyard, or blow up a creature with mana value 3 or less. So this is a 3-mana reanimate spell, or it is a 3-mana destruction spell. When we are playing a budget deck, it is very, very important for a lot of our spells to be modal, because modal spells tend to be, 1, inexpensive, but 2, they cover a lot more bases for us. We need our cards to have more legwork because we don't have the strongest cards available in a budget build. Then we have Young Necromancer, 5 mana. When it enters the battlefield, exile any 2 cards from your grave, and then return any creature from your grave to the battlefield. This is a 2/3 body you can sack to something else that automatically brings another body out for you. Then probably my favorite reanimation spell of all time, the Altar of Baal. This allows us to pay 2 mana to drop it on the board, and then anytime we have the 3 mana available at sorcery speed, we can exile a creature we control, usually a token, and return any creature in our graveyard to the battlefield. And this is recurable. This is a reanimation spell that we get to use over and over and over again until our opponents try to destroy it. And since a lot of the ways that we have to destroy enchantments and artifacts is in green, we have at least a good chunk of those covered by running the Death Grip that we mentioned before. We also have Dread Return, 4 mana Reanimate with Flashback that can just sack our tokens to activate again. Whisper Blood Liturgist, which allows us to sack 2 creatures to reanimate any 1 creature. Unearth, a 1 mana reanimation spell for cheap creatures. Doomed Necromancer, basically it's just good Soul Coil Viper. Sack it to get a creature from your graveyard. Soul Exchange, this is an interesting one. Not a lot of people run this. You can sack a creature on your board, and then you have to exile it. And then you get to take any creature from your graveyard and put it onto the battlefield. So this just says, banish a token that we have that we don't like, and just reanimate any creature for 2. Easy. Then we have Blood for Bones, sack a creature to activate it, which again triggers our commander, then return any creature from our battlefield to the graveyard, and then return another creature from the battlefield to our hand. So, a thing we can do, we can play this card, sacrifice something that we really want to use again and again, like a Plague Crafter. We sacrifice the Plague Crafter to this, and then we automatically get another creature onto the battlefield, and then put that Plague Crafter into our hand to drop down on the board and cause mayhem again. This is a reanimation spell that does a lot of work for us in this deck. And then we have the Gixian Puppeteer. Anytime you draw your second card each turn, which we can do a lot of, each opponent loses 2 life, and you gain 2 life. This is a secondary win con with the massive amount of ways we have to instant speed draw cards by sacking creatures or by using Greed's effect. We can use this on every single turn. So let's say, for instance, we have Greed on the battlefield with Gixian Puppeteer. We're going to use our Greed spell to pay 2 life and draw a card. And then we're going to use it again to pay 2 life and draw a card, gaining us 2 life, so we only paid 2 total, and also burning everybody for 2. So effectively, we took 2, and everybody took 2, and we got to draw 2 cards. That's honestly a very, very good bit of return for us. But this also does something else for us. If the Gixian Puppeteer dies, you can return any creature with mana value 3 or less from our graveyard to the battlefield. We have so many ways of recurring our important pieces in the deck. This is just another one of the ways we have of recurring very, very, very important creatures like Midnight Reaper and Grim Haruspex and Zulaport Cutthroat, and even our commander, if they start to get too heavily costed. All of those can come back to the battlefield really easy using the Gixian Puppeteer. But of course, now we have to end on our land package. Normally, I would have a board wipe package in a deck like this, but honestly, it's not super necessary since all of our removal is Omni creature removal. We are hitting everybody's creatures all game. So our land package is 28 basic swamps, because we just can. Myriad Landscape, a good ramping land that doesn't cost a whole lot of money. The Memorial to Folly, which is a way to take any creature from our graveyard and put it back into our hand while also being a land. Barren Moor, a land we can cycle when we need it to. Hidden Necropolis. This is an interesting one. It's a new one from Ixalan that I want to try to use in a few more decks, but it's tap land, which we can afford a couple of them because we're a monocolored deck. We can pay 5 mana and sack it, and then discover 4, which is basically Cascade for 4. We can look at the top cards of our decks until we hit a card that costs 4 or less mana, and then we can either put it in our hand or cast it. So late game, when everybody's been board wiped a couple times and they are just down and out, we can sack this land away to just gain some value, and not just draw a card value where it may or may not be good. This gives us a guaranteed castable spell. I want to give it a couple tries. But we do have ways to just draw cards with our lands too. The Dross Pits allows us to sack it and draw a card when we need to. So between this and Barren Moor and Hidden Necropolis, we've got a few ways to use our lands twice for us, even after they have served their purpose and we are actually fully ramped out of the game. But that's it for this deck. Remember, that was Vraan, the Executioner Thane. His effect was whenever one or more of your creatures die, which hopefully you saw we've got a billion ways to do that on everybody's turn. Each opponent loses 2 life, and you gain 2 life. The ability only triggers once each turn, but that's fine. We plan on activating it on everybody's turn during the turn cycle, burning everybody for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We want to burn people for a ton on every single turn. Like if we've got the Vraan and we've got Agent and like Vindictive Vampire, right? Just 3 of our easy to drop on the board cards. Every time we sack a creature, everybody's burning for 4. So every turn cycle, we are just hurting the table for 12. That means that everybody has 3 turns to deal with us. They have 3 turn cycles to deal with us, or they won't have enough mana to pay for jack all, and they're basically at our mercy. Unless we're fighting a life gain deck specifically, we are in a very, very good spot because of the type of deck that Vraan allows us to build. So hopefully you enjoyed this. If you haven't played an Aristocrat deck before, maybe this will be a good way to onboard into one. Like I said, the deck is super, super cheap. We managed to build it for, what was that price again? Looking at the total, $15.04. So please give this one a try. The link for it is going to be available in the description. It's a link to the Moxfield page there. And also, every single deck that I'm building for this $15 challenge is going to be available there, and we are going to be running $15 challenge games over on Spell Table as well on my stream. So please build something. Let me know what you've built in the comment section below. Let me know what your thoughts are for this one as well. And let me know if I'm going to see you over on those games. With that all said, though, hope you all enjoyed. Hit the like button if you haven't already. And as always, everyone, insert into video tagline here. Hey, I just quickly want to give a thank you to all of my wonderful patrons who keep this show running. YouTube and Twitch are a pretty bumpy ride at the best of times, and the stability that Patreon provides me is worth more than I can say here. I'd also like to thank each and every one of my $20 and up patrons here, and they would be Red Joker, Britzkrieg, Cameron, Dren, Jemshin, Smiling DM, Poundini, Mabbity Babbity, Naomi, Isaac, Agamotto, Jordan, Ravi, Giuni, Kiratorian, Prisma, all of you, Sajit, I'm not saying that part, and Starlight. And finally, thank you to everyone else that helps keep this channel alive. While you're here, why not check out another video? And thank you for watching.